we will be looking at the 5080 versus the 5090 in Oblivion Remastered. These are the two video cards that are being used to do this comparison in this benchmark. In this first comparison, we are looking at the 5090 Founders Edition at factory settings versus the 5080 MSI Ventus 4K Ultra with DLSS quality hardware Lumen turned on, with no motion blur. We see that the 5090 has a 33% increase in average FPS and an 18% increase in the 1% lows. 5090 is using about 100 to 140 watt more than the 5080. Benchmark was done on a second pass due to shader compilation stutter. The 5090 is able to get an average FPS of 77 and the 1% lows around 47. Uses about 400 watts on average. The 80 is not able to get above 60 FPS on average, but it is using only around 275 watts. The outdoor environments are much more taxing on the GPU than in the cities. In this comparison, we're looking at the 5090 versus the 5080, both at factory settings, but this time 4K Ultra DLSS quality, but software Lumen, not hardware Lumen. A 35% increase in average FPS with the 5090 and a 33% increase in 1% lows. The game performs better with less stuttering. However, Lumen does look better than software Lumen. On the 5090, the average FPS is 92, which is higher than the hardware Lumen, with the average 1% low around 60. And the 5080 is above 60 FPS, average FPS around 68, and an average 1% low at 45. Here we're looking at the 5080 at factory settings against the 5080 overclocked. And we see a 9% increase in average FPS, 8% increase in 1% lows, and only a 10 watt increase. We're looking at 4K Ultra with DLSS quality and hardware Lumen. Seems to be worth it to overclock the 5080 because it's only a small power increase, but you get above 60 FPS with DLSS quality hardware Lumen. You can see that the 5080 is getting only average of 58 FPS, but the 5080 overclocked is above 60 FPS at 63 and an average 1% low at 43 instead of 40. In this final comparison, we're looking at all 5090 results, but one at factory settings, one at a tuned undervolt, and another at overclock settings with power increase. Things are all the same at 4K Ultra with DLSS quality and hardware Lumen. The 5090 tuned undervolt gets around the same performance as the factory settings. However, it is using 70 watt less. The 5090 overclocked uses about 30 more watts at around 4% increase in average FPS and a 6% increase in 1% lows. Overclocking a 5090 might be worth it in this game if you are not concerned about power increase. You can see that the average FPS in the factory settings is about the same with the tune undervolt. The volt is much more efficient. However, even the factory settings doesn't seem to be pushing the maximum wattage. Overclocking does use more watt, but it isn't as much as compared to other games. Still gain around the same amount of 5% increased performance. The GPU is not being fully used, so that's why the wattage isn't as high as other games. If you're a fan of Skyrim, Oblivion is definitely a game that you should try out, especially if you haven't played the original. The remastered is pretty much the original but with better graphics. The game does have some performance issues due to the Unreal Engine. The main criticism is that the game hasn't been optimized to the level of current games. It's too much like the original without enough significant upgrades in the gameplay. So the overall rating is about a 7.9 out of 10. Maybe a game that might be worth holding off playing until there are more patches and also mods that can improve the overall gameplay. A lot of the bugs in the original have been just transfer over to the remastered. But if you play the original, it might be worth checking out since you already know the workarounds.